Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we are learning Amos 7a, that is the prophet Amos, chapter 7, the first portion. This chapter is not super long, but it still has clear division between the first and second halves, so I'm going to divide it into two separate podcasts because the messages are very different. The first part of chapter 7 is a very powerful message and somewhat theologically complex, and let's delve into it. So this is Saul Weinreb. I'm the host for your podcast. So Amos chapter 7 verse 1 reads as follows: Ko hirani Adonai Elohim. So God, the Lord our God, showed me as follows. The following vision I saw in a vision. V'hinei yotzer govai. God was creating a plague of locusts. At the time of year, betchilat alot halokesh, during the time when the lokesh was growing. The lokesh is the crops that grow late in the season. V'hinei lekesh, and behold, these crops were beginning to sprout. Achar gizeh hamelach, after the king's shearing, the king's reaping, so to speak, has been done. So apparently there was a season when the king would take certain portions of the crops for his to support his his palace, his state, his animals, or whatever. And then after that, the last final big crop would grow, and this was obviously a very important time. And God was creating the locusts to come and eat up that crop, and presumably this is the crop that would sustain the people until the next season. So this would be quite a devastating blow if there would be a plague of locusts at this time. And in this vision, as I was watching, as the locusts were finishing off and completing, kila is completing and it's also gives the connotation of a devastating and complete destruction of the grasses of the land. V'omar, and when he saw the terror and the horror and the indiscriminate and total nature of the destruction, Amos the prophet says to God, Adonai Elohim, Salachna, please forgive the people. Mi Yakum Yaakov, can the people of Jacob. And remember, we've pointed out in Amos and in other prophets, when the term Jacob is used, it's a reference to the entire people of Israel, the northern and the southern kingdoms. So Yaakov is meant to refer to the entirety of the people. Can the nation survive? Kikatonhu, for they are small. I'm going to get back to the meaning of this phrase, kikatonhu. Well, actually, let's deal with it now. Kikatonhu, the simple meaning is that the people are small. There's a small nation. They're a humble nation. They're a poor nation. They simply cannot survive such destruction. It will completely wipe out the people. That's the simple meaning of katon. I'm going to get back later to some other possible meanings of that word. But interestingly, I'm just going to point out here that the prayer that Amos chooses is something I would like to focus on after we finish reading the verses. And that is, he chooses to pray by asking God, the people are so small, they can't handle such a punishment. While there are many other approaches that he could have taken, this is the one that he chose. And then verse 3, Nicham Adonai Azos, God changed his mind, so to speak, or he comforted his mind, and he calmed his anger down regarding this because of the prayer, presumably. And lo tihye amar Adonai, and God said, okay, this plague will not happen. It will not be. In other words, he listened to the prayer of the prophet. And then the vision continues, or this was a second vision. Ko hirani Adonai Elohim. So God, the Lord God, showed me as follows. V'hinei korei lariv ba'esh. God was summoning, or he was calling up in order to fight his fight or to mete out his punishment in fire. Adonai Elohim. So was the Lord God doing. Vatochalet hatom rabba, and the flames consumed the great depths, the great deep In other words, it consumed the entire world down to the levels of the great deep. And it was consuming and burning through the fields, a massive forest and brush fire that just burnt everything. V'omar, and I said, Adonai Elohim, God, Chadalna, please hold back. Please hold this back. Please stop this. Miyakum Yaakov, can the people of Yaakov survive this kikatonu, for they are so small? The same basic prayer, although this time, the first time he said, Salachna, please forgive. And this time he says, please hold back. Please don't mete out such terrible punishment. And then again, Nicham Adonai Alzo, it's the same language. God changed his mind, or God was, he relented. He calmed down his anger. Gam hi lo tiyeh, this also will not actually occur. Amar Adonai Elohim, so says God. One gets the impression here that that God wasn't actually showing him what he was going to do, but God was actually showing him the things that he's not going to do. And now God was saying, Gam hi lo tiyeh. And so is this in response to the prayer of Amos, or was this God's initial intention? Of course, he wanted to elicit the prayer from Amos, but his initial intention was God wanted to say, I'm not doing a destruction that's complete and utter destruction, but rather I'm going to do as follows, which is the third portion of the vision. Kohir ani, so God showed me again in either a third vision or a third part of the same vision. V'hinei, and behold, Adonai nitzav al chomat anoch. God was standing above a wall built with a plumb line. So one could build a wall simply by piling rocks. And if it's a small, simple structure, you can build a wall like that. But if you want to build a nice, big structure, it has to be straight. It has to be done properly for it to stand and for it to be proper. So a plumb line is a measuring line used to, it's basically a rope with a heavy weight at the end. So if you stand at a height and you drop it, it will show a straight line. So this was a measuring device used all the way back into antiquity to help build a straight wall for a large structure. So God was standing there with this plumb line, measuring out the straightness of his wall, and in God's hand, he was holding this plumb line. Vayomer Adonai Eli, and God said to me, Ma atoro e Amos, what do you see now, Amos? What do you see? V'omar, and I said, Anoch, I see a plumb line. Vayomer Adonai, and God said to the prophet, Hineni sam anoch b'kerav ami Yisrael, I'm going to place a plumb line. What kind of punishment am I going to do? A punishment that is measured. I'm going to put out a measuring plumb line within my nation Israel. Osif od avarlo. I will no longer pass over his sins. I do, and I will punish them for their sins. But the kind of punishment I'm going to do is not an indiscriminate punishment like the grasshoppers, the locust plague, or the fire, which is utter destruction. But rather, I'm going to do a measured punishment. A measured punishment like the one with the plumb line. V'noshamu bamos Yitzchak, and the altars upon which the people, the descendants of Isaac, have been worshipping idols, Umikdashei Yisrael, and the holy places, or the holy with a small h, not with a capital H, the places that the people of Israel set aside to do their iniquities and their immorality, Yecharavu, those places will be destroyed. V'kamti, and I will stand al beis Yeravam, I stand against the house of Jeroboam, the king of the northern kingdom, Becharev, and I will bring sword to them, and they will be destroyed. This is specifically the Beit Yeravam, the house of Jeroboam, because we know historically that Jeroboam II, Yeravam ben Yoash, who was the king at the time of Amos, did not die by sword. He died and he was succeeded by his son, but his family, his son, was destroyed eventually by sword, and that's why it says V'kamti al Beit Yeravam. There's several issues here that I would like to address in this in this portion. This concludes the portion of chapter 7 that I'm going to deal with today, but I would like to address a few issues. Number one, it seems that it is the indiscriminateness, so to speak, of the punishment of the fire and the locust, which which was what Amos prayed to God not to do. But once God said, I'm going to do it in a measured way with an anoch, at that point, Amos no longer prayed. First of all, God basically told him don't bother praying, because lo osif odav orlo. God said, I will not pass over these sins. I will punish them for these sins. But also, it's similar to what we find with Avraham Avinu, with Abraham, when he prayed for Sodom back in Genesis, where Abraham said, Ha'af tispet tzadikim rasha. Abraham said, if there's anyone righteous within the city, how could you destroy the entire city? You must save it because of the righteous ones. In other words, don't destroy everything. Everyone doesn't deserve to die. And in an utter destruction, everyone dies, including the righteous ones. So what Amos was objecting to was then, according to this understanding, was the indiscriminate nature of the fire and the locust. It's another possible. So there are several major issues that are dealt with among the commentaries, and one of them is the nature of prayer itself. Is it just at all? Is it when God is going to punish? If God felt that it was right to destroy the people with locusts or fire, then what did the prayer help to change that? This is a general question that applies to prayer in general. If God feels that a certain thing is the right thing to do, how does a human being's prayer change that? In addition, so I'm not going to answer that question now. I'm just raising it because it's a very basic philosophical question. And then there's the idea of collective punishment at all. If it's not just to punish everyone, because people that are righteous are being punished along with the people that are not, then why is collective punishment ever okay? The other the issue here is one understanding here is that in this vision, and it kind of reads along this way, that God was actually trying to teach Amos that the punishment needs to be done because it needs to be done. And I am not going to punish them in a way of utter destruction. And what Amos was pointing out to God was something that God, of course, already knew, and that is that if he would release utter destruction upon the people, then they would be destroyed forever, which is not what God desired. Which brings us to the image of the chomat anoch, the wall in the plumb line. The wall in the plumb line as an image itself is an image of construction, not an image of destruction. It's an image of building, not an image of tearing down. And this is really, really important, because what God is saying is, yes, I'm going to apply a plumb line, but the purpose of the punishment is to build the people, not to destroy them. And God, in a beautiful way here, teaches Amos this lesson. I'm not going to send utter destruction, because I know kikatonhu, I know the people are small and the people will not survive. And I want the people to survive, but I want them to learn a lesson. I want them to learn a lesson, and therefore the punishments have to come because of their sins. And therefore, he showed him an image of a chomat anach, a wall of anach, a wall being built with a plumb line, an exact, perfect wall. Not just a haphazard wall that's a pile of rocks, but an exact, perfect wall, because this is the purpose of the punishment. The purpose of the punishment is to build the people, not to break them down. And in that, which again explains why Amos did not pray for God to stop this kind of punishment, because the purpose of this was to build the people as opposed to destroy them. I would like to point out one other thing before we leave this chapter here, and that is actually two more things. The prayer of kikatonu, because the people are small. On a simple level, I mentioned that kikatonu means that the people are small. In other words, they're too small to handle this. Another way of understanding that is because the people are small, meaning because they are humble. They are a humble people. They do not all deserve to be killed. As we find many times in the Torah, we find Akiatem hama'at mikol amim. You are the smallest among the other nations. When all is said and done, the people do have a basic humility and understanding of their of their tininess, of their smallness. And therefore, he was actually saying to God that, the people are humble. So that would be another way of understanding of ki katonhu. And so do not punish them ki katonhu, because they are small, they are humble. And now the other thing that I wanted to point out is what the Talmud says in Bava Metzia 59a. One of the most famous portions of the Talmud was the argument between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis regarding the laws of a certain oven, the oven of Achnai. And there was a famous debate where Rabbi Eliezer brought signs from the heaven to show that he was right, but the rabbis ended up saying that no, the Torah is not, the law is not decided by signs from heaven, but the law is decided by people in honest debate, and so on. Now, how does that relate to this here? Because that entire story in the Talmud in Bava Metzia was being brought because at the end of the story, the rabbis were guilty of oppression towards Rabbi Eliezer, and the Gemara discusses that and how the rabbis tried to apologize and so on for the oppression of Rabbi Eliezer at the end of that argument. And right before that story was brought, the Talmud made a statement, and that is that all the punishment for all sins God can do through intermediaries, but the punishment for oppression of one person against another, or of people against other people, the punishment of oppression, that's done by God himself. And this verse is brought as support, because God himself was standing over the wall with a chomat anach, with a wall built by a plumb line, with an anach, with the plumb line in his hand. Now, it's a play on words, because the word anach is similar to the word ona'ah, which means oppression. So, but the Talmud is assuming that the punishment, the punishment that God says I have to mete out, I will not pass over this, is because the people were oppressive towards others. This is the chomat anach. And it seems very consistent with the message of Amos overall. And God was hinting by showing Amos the anach, the ona'ah, the oppression. God was saying, this oppression, yes, maybe katonhu, maybe the people do have some humility and I do need to save them. But oppression of others, I cannot pass over on. I can't pass that up. And this is the message of tzedek u'mishpat, of justice and righteousness, which is the theme of the entire book of Amos. That when I see the wealthy oppressing the poor, this, God says, I myself have to come down and punish the people for that. I cannot let this go on. And that's why Amos understood so clearly that this unfortunate punishment needed to take place. Thank you so much for studying Amos 7a. Looking forward to completing the study of chapter 7 together with you.